Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you like this episode, please remember to hit the like button and leave a comment or two, then subscribe and click on the bell to receive notifications of whenever we release new videos. Also, please remember to share them to your social media. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to a remote trail system near Ramsay Arm on the west coast of British Columbia, Canada. The inlet to Ramsay Arm is the Quatam River, which offers prime timber for lumber harvesting. The area is a coastal mountain range and part of the temperate rainforest that runs from northern California to southern Alaska. The islands and inlets here are covered in dense stands of fir, spruce, and cedar trees that completely cover the hills and mountainsides. The common animals in this area include black-tailed deer, moose, and Roosevelt elk. The predators in this area include cougars, coyotes, wolves, as well as black and brown bears. On the day of Monday, July 19th, 2019, 44-year-old Colin Dowler was up riding and hiking along the Ramsay Arm trail system. Colin was originally from Quadra Island, which is just north of the town of Campbell River. He worked as the maintenance manager at the Vancouver Island Health Authority and was trained as an electrician. Colin was a big fan of being outside and being very fit. He was in great shape and smaller in size, but strong. He suffered from a congenital knee disorder, but didn't let it hold him back from doing what he loved. Colin's family had generational ties to the land. A 7,000-foot high mountain was named after his grandfather as Mount Dowler, and it looks very similar to a bear canine tooth. His plans were to ride his mountain bike to the base of the trailhead up Mount Dowler, make the hike to the summit, and spend the night there. Then he planned to return on roughly the same route and end his short adventure with fond memories of the trip and his grandfather. A few weeks before, in June, Colin had made an exploratory trip to the area and decided to return for an overnight trip to Mount Dowler. He had spent enough time in the area to learn that he wouldn't be able to run up and climb the mountain and return in one day, but learned the particulars of this trip that would help him be successful on his next outing. Upon learning of Colin's plans to boat to an obscure inlet and then bike up a logging road to camp by himself, his wife of 16 years, Jen, expressed some concern. Colin allayed her fears by saying if he wasn't back by 8 p.m. on Monday night, she could start worrying then. The day before, on Sunday, July 18th, Colin had made his way to the logging camp on the Quatam River by boat. He had approached occupants of the camp and asked for directions to a road that would take him to Mount Dowler. The camp cook, Vito Andrea, asked him if there was anything he needed, and Colin indicated he had forgotten to buy bear spray on his way to the boat launch. Vito did him one better. He gave Colin a canister of bear spray, then helped him load his backpack and mountain bike into the back of the company truck and drove him to the old logging road. After executing the first half of his plan, Colin was about 2 kilometers into the return trip when his attention was stolen from taking in the amazing views. He glanced up the logging road he was riding down, and about 100 feet ahead of him a huge brown bear was slowly walking toward him. It was making eye contact, and was clearly not surprised at his appearance so close to it. Now, every time Colin had seen a black bear or a grizzly in the wild before, it had turned tail and ran in the opposite direction. This bear clearly didn't do that, and that was very worrying. Colin was concerned at seeing the bear, but his concern grew when the bear continued to amble toward him. He reached into his pocket to pull out his bear spray, but it was missing. At some point in the journey, he had lost it along the trail. The bear's head was at a normal walking height, and it was walking at a normal pace. It stared at him as it approached him. It didn't growl or be overtly aggressive toward him as it closed the distance on him. As the big bear approached within a few feet, Colin positioned his bike between the two of them. He moved off the trail a few feet to allow the bear room to pass by him. He tried to soothe the bear with calm speech, telling the bear that he was no threat and that they didn't have a problem with each other. As the bear walked past Colin and his bike, as soon as its rear end passed the rear tire of Colin's bike, it lowered its head, spun toward him, and tried to approach him from behind. Colin reacted and quickly turned to keep his bike between them. The bear jumped a bit with the sudden movement. Colin backed up slowly and continually pushed the bike toward the bear as a barrier between him and its claws and teeth. The bear pushed at his bike with its paws, gradually increasing its force with each push. It swatted his bike in stark communication of its intentions toward him. Colin then thought of distracting the bear. Perhaps it had smelled the food he had in his pack. He removed his backpack and tossed it a few feet, but still between them and off the side a bit. The bear sniffed the backpack briefly, and then continued its slow and steady stalk toward him. After his bike and backpack had no effect in distracting the bear, Colin decided to use a more forceful means of persuading the bear to find easier prey. He took his hiking pole, banged it on the frame of his mountain bike, and yelled. He hoped to make enough noise to drive the bear away. Next, he poked the bear right between the eyes with his hiking pole. He poked and prodded at the bear, trying to threaten it into leaving him alone. The bear simply bit onto the pole and tried to wrestle it from Colin's grasp. After swatting the hiking pole out of its way, it continued to slowly stalk Colin. Colin thought that perhaps the bear needed a more convincing implication for its aggressive behavior. He picked his bike up over his head and hurled it toward the bear, hoping the sprockets or pedals might inflict a painful injury to the bear, convincing it to leave him alone. The bike simply bounced off of the bear, and it ominously stepped over Colin's only remaining means of defending himself. By now, the bear was only a few feet from Colin. It wrapped its paw around his waist and pulled him toward its wide-open mouth. He watched in terror as the bear clamped its enormous jaws onto the side of his abdomen just above his left hip. Colin could feel his own hot blood pouring down his own skin. Colin felt helpless as the giant bear carried him like a dog carrying its favorite toy. He hung from its mouth, suspended by the flesh of his side, as it lumbered toward the edge of the road. It was clearly focused on taking the man into the bushes and killing him there. As the bear carried Colin the 50-foot distance off the edge of the road, he kicked his feet, gouged it in the eyes, and twisted and peeled its lips back, trying to force it to drop him. As he reached for the bear's lips again, the bear swiveled its head and chomped onto his hand, fending it away. After carrying him to the shoulder of the road, the bear began tearing chunks of flesh from Colin's side, hip, and upper left thigh by biting him and tossing its head back and forth. Each time it bit him, Colin would shriek in pain. The massive bear laid across Colin's body to hold him still while it chewed and ripped at the flesh on his side and hip area. He could hear the bear's teeth grating on his femur and hip bones as it tore his flesh with its teeth. He could see the bear's huge yellow teeth as it chewed and drooled into his wounds. At that point, Colin decided to play dead and went limp. This did nothing to stop the bear from tearing and biting his flesh. The bear simply continued to chew on him, and clearly never viewed him as a threat from which it had to defend itself. It viewed him as food from the first moment it saw him and was now feeding on him while he was still alive to feel all of it. As the bear repeatedly bit his hands and feet, Colin's mind flashed to his family. He thought of his wife and their kids. It was then that he remembered a recent gift he had received from his father. It was a pocket knife manufactured by Buck Knives with a small 2 3/4-inch blade. He reached both hands underneath the bear and into his pocket to retrieve the weapon from his pocket. After several attempts to retrieve the knife, he was finally successful at pulling it from his pocket. Colin quickly unfolded the short blade and reached underneath the bear toward his left hip. From beneath the bear, Colin plunged it into the bear's neck. The stab had sunk into the bear's flesh to the entire length of the small blade. Blood poured from the bear's neck wound, and it seemed surprised at the injury Colin inflicted so quickly. Colin yelled out, "Now you are bleeding too, bear!" The bear dropped Colin and retreated a few meters and stared at him. Colin wanted him to come back so he could stab him a bunch more times. The bear was in obvious distress and defecated and urinated as a sign of it. The bear seemed to be re-evaluating its attack on Colin, who watched as blood trickled from the gaping wound in the bear's neck. It was clearly struggling to breathe. It glanced toward Colin, then at his bike, and back toward the bush from where it had emerged. It occurred to Colin that he and the bear were now watching each other die. As the bear looked things over, Colin used his pocket knife to cut his shirt sleeve loose from his shirt. He quickly wrapped it around his left thigh and tied it off in a makeshift attempt at a tourniquet. As soon as Colin glanced back toward the bear, it was gone. Colin used this time to scoot on his butt back toward his mountain bike. He used the bike to help him regain his feet and struggled to straddle his only means of escape. As soon as he tried to pedal, he wrecked his mountain bike. He repositioned himself and tried again. His return route was uphill for a short distance, and he pushed himself along with his uninjured leg. He dug deep for the energy to find his way to help, driven by the thought that he may live, albeit as an amputee. Colin had a 5-kilometer downhill ride back to the logging camp, and the help he hoped he would find there. If he were uninjured, this ride would have taken him just under half an hour, but with his left leg and hip so grievously wounded, he made much slower time than that. After his arrival at the logging camp, Colin crashed his mountain bike into the mess hall steps. His timing couldn't have been better, as it was lunchtime. He screamed, "I have been attacked by a bear! Call a helicopter!" A handful of logging camp workers emerged from the mess hall. As it turned out, all 5 of the men were trained in first aid just the week before, to Colin's benefit. They dragged him inside the mess hall and immediately got to work to stop or slow his bleeding. One of the responders was the camp cook, Vito Gianandrea. As the loggers looked Colin over, Gianandrea noticed a huge chunk of flesh he described as the size of a T-bone steak, missing from Colin's kidney area. He was quoted as saying that the loggers could see things a person is not supposed to see in regard to Colin's injuries. The loggers contacted emergency services using a satellite phone, and a medevac helicopter was dispatched to the logging camp. The medevac service had just recently been cleared to carry blood for transfusion on board, of which Colin was one of the first recipients. This was the first time the medevac pilot, Kalani Polson, had ever transported a bear attack victim to the hospital. As he lifted one of the bandages, applied by the loggers, he stared at the 6-inch by 6-inch gaping wound the bear had left in Colin's side. He stated that he could see Colin's kidney and adrenal gland through the wound. The paramedics immediately began a blood transfusion before putting Colin on the medevac helicopter. One of the loggers held the blood bags for Colin as the helicopter made its way to the hospital. Colin was whisked to Vancouver General Hospital, which is one of the finest trauma centers in the nation. He was being treated there within 70 minutes of arriving at the logging camp, which clearly gave him a better chance of survival. Colin's wounds to his hip, side, and thigh were severe, and took painstaking physiotherapy to only partially recover from. The pictures of his wounds would definitely not pass YouTube standards, so I have posted them on my Patreon, linked below. If you choose to look at them, just be warned, they are very graphic and horrific. The proud Canadian boasted that his entire experience was an example of Canadian healthcare at its finest. He was grateful for the care and attention from all of the medical professionals who cared for him at the hospital. It took Colin 2 years to recover enough to run in a half marathon in September of 2020, despite his doctors telling him he would never walk normally again. To say the guy is persistent and tough is a gross understatement. Colin has admitted that his lengthy recovery has been disappointing at times, but he marvels at the fact that he has progressed so much since the attack. Colin's wife of 16 years, Jen, stated that she was just grateful that he is so stubborn. She was also very grateful to the logging camp workers for being so reassuring and helpful to her husband when he needed them. In the days after Colin's attack, conservation officers tracked the brown bear down. As they neared the location they thought the bear was at, the bear had quietly crept to within a few yards of the conservation officers, unbeknownst to them. One of the conservation officers picked up the bear's scent on the breeze and turned around to see the bear before it closed in on the officers. A second armed officer was alerted and turned around just in time to dispatch the human-hunting brown bear. Upon examining the brown bear's tracks, the conservation officers determined that the bear had been stalking them for about 30 minutes. The whole while they thought they were stalking it. The bear was examined and found to be a 4 or 5 years old male. It weighed about 350 pounds, was about 9 feet in length, and was found to be in healthy condition. The grizzly also bore a neck wound from Colin's knife, which made them certain they had killed the grizzly who attacked him. The authorities deemed Colin's attack as a strictly and clearly predatory bear attack. Colin summarized his feelings about the attack by stating he is comfortable being the badass dude who took on a grizzly bear with a pocket knife and won. He states that focusing on the awesomeness of the experience and his survival supersedes the bad parts. In British Columbia, authorities estimate that there are about 15,000 grizzly bears and somewhere between 120 to 150,000 black bears. Authorities receive somewhere between 14 and 25,000 calls each year that report bear sightings or conflicts. They state that most of these calls are human-caused problems that are antagonized by improper storage of garbage or leaving out food or barbecue grills which tempt the sensitive noses of bears. Very few of these calls lead to bears being killed due to presenting a danger to the public. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I am left with a few questions for you. Do you think if Colin hadn't lost his bear spray, it would have prevented his bear attack? Why do you think a healthy, young male grizzly would decide to stalk, kill, and eat a human being? What else do you think Colin could have done to avoid this bear attack? Do you think the behavior of the bear should have been interpreted as predatory behavior? I will be glad to read and answer your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below and let's talk about it. Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider clicking on the like button and clicking on the bell icon. We'll help you know when we post our new episodes. Posting our video links to your social media profiles furthers awareness, and it's fun. We slashed our prices in our merch store, linked below, so check out the bargains there while you shop. As a member of our human community, remember to adventure bravely and be careful out there, especially in bear country.